Welcome to the Add Heart Podcast, the podcast that inspires heart-first living. This is where you'll get practical tools to reduce stress, inspire creative action, and energize your personal growth momentum, along with ways to apply these tools. And now, here's your host, Deborah Rosman.
Hello, I'm Deborah Rosman, and a warm welcome to our listeners to the Add Heart Podcast. The purpose of the Add Heart Podcast is to inspire our forward movement and heart-powered intentions. And my topic this episode is really about how our heart can improve our hormones and hormone health. And my guest is Dr. Tara Scott, often called the Hormone Guru. She is the founder of Revitalize, a nationally recognized authority on hormone and wellness-related issues. Tara is an OB-GYN and trained and certified by the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. I thought that was interesting, both ends of the human spectrum, birth to aging. And her medical practice now is devoted strictly to regenerative medicine, hormone-related issues, and evidence-based hormone therapy. She's a national speaker on the subject and also a certified heart math health professional. Welcome, Tara. We are so glad to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
You know, I picked this topic because I think the hormones are behind so much of the issues that we see today on the surface. Like chronic diseases, people are so much stress these days, including teenagers. They're going through so many hormonal changes. And just last week, I was shocked to read a CDC report that in the U.S., around 1 in 3 high school girls have seriously considered attempting suicide, and more than half reported feeling persistently sad or hopeless. That's a record high number. And the reasons include, what adults will feel hopeless about the world situation, but more particularly bullying and loneliness, parental and school pressure, and more. And it just sounds they're so cut off from the heart and the regenerative qualities of their spirit. What have you noticed? What is the effects you see of today's stress on female hormones, especially young girls?
Well, I think, specifically for young girls, it started with the social media, right? And so with the advent of texting and digital communication. Now, remember when we were little, you had a phone, right, that hung on the wall and, you had to wait, nobody could talk on the phone and you had to put all your attention in that. And nowadays these kids are texting, which it is connecting, but it's not the same as hearing someone's voice, hearing someone's inflection, or even just spending time with someone. So there's a lack of human contact. And then we segue from that into COVID. And so everybody is stressed. And so the biggest thing that we're seeing is, I think, the effect of these stress hormones on female and male hormones and neurotransmitters and the snowball effect that it's happening because the world is up, just totally up at a level of stress that's unbelievable in our lifetime.
Yeah. We hear the word stress and we become adapted to it because we think we can't do anything about it. And of course, that's one thing that you, Heart Math, we're all trying to say, no, you can. But underneath it is these internal pharmacy that's going on of our hormones and our immune system and how all that's changing in response to that. Just in the 1990s, we were delighted at Heart Math Research Institute to discover that the heart produces as much oxytocin, the bonding hormone, as the brain, and also a lot of the other brain neurotransmitters, and how activating the heart can really help create that balance in the hormones. What do you see?
Well, there's definitely a connection there. And so a lot of it is through our stress hormone cortisol. And so if you think about a female menstrual cycle, the whole purpose is reproduction, right? So you have day one, you have a female starting her menstrual cycle, then you have a follicle or an egg is growing and it's producing estradiol. So in the middle of the month, you have ovulation. And after the egg is released, the shell of the egg kind of becomes what's called the corpus luteum and produces progesterone. So that process goes on from puberty until menopause. But it doesn't exist in isolation from our stress hormones. So we have our adrenal gland that produces DHEA and it produces cortisol. Everything comes from cholesterol. So if you think of your ovaries as your monthly paycheck, you have your adrenal gland as your 401k. So what's happening with a lot of people now is they're living paycheck to paycheck and they're not investing in their savings account because we're having this chronic stress that's depleting these hormones of the adrenal gland. When your estrogen drops or your testosterone drops or even your cortisol, there's always a feedback back to the brain saying, hey, it's dropping. You better send a signal so that we can stimulate more production. But there is not that signal for DHEA. So that drops without people knowing it. So we're seeing a lot of men with lower testosterone, a lot of women with lower androgens as a result of stress. So we're first seeing a change in the hormones, not to mention your brain doesn't know if you're running from a bear or you're stressed about COVID or if you have a deadline at work. The physiological response is the same. Increase your heart rate, make you more alert. Let's fuel your muscles. Let's break down your bones to get calcium to those muscles so you can contract and run from the bear. But that whole fight or flight was not designed to be, it was fight or flight, run from the bear, and then rest and relaxation, right? So back in the caveman days, he had stress. And then he ran from the bear. He either lived or died from that bear attack, right? And what happened after that? He went back to his cave. There was no electricity, so he slept 12 hours a night. He was hunting for food and eating that trendy paleo diet, right? So food was good. And then he had rest and restoration. But all of us have had, thankfully, a lot of us have not had a brush with death, but what we've had is chronic undulating stress at a higher level. And we're not designed to maintain that constant bombardment. Now we're just talking about stress. That could be physiological. It could be mental, emotional, infectious. It could be the lights, the screens. Who knows what the stressors are? We're bombarded with it. It could be environmental, endocrine disruptors. It's just this toxic environment we're in, this stressful environment and then the lifestyle of the go, go, go. What's the standard greeting? How are you? I'm great. I'm busy, right? It's like, if you say, well, I'm doing really well. I sleep, 9 hours a night and I meditate and I go to yoga. Like people look at you like if you do. Self-care is coming back in vogue with the millennials, but my generation, it's not. It's like busy, 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 right?
Yeah. It's amazing. You just reminded me about something I also read, that throughout the world, and this is in undeveloped countries too, as well as here, girls are reaching puberty earlier. Why do you think that's happening?
And it's interesting. They are reaching puberty earlier. And so what does the Academy of Pediatrics do? They revise the standard age of puberty. Instead of saying it's abnormal, they change the normal range to lower the age, which that's not accurate. It's still abnormal to start. It's estrogen in our environment that's stimulating breast development earlier, precocious puberty. It's endocrine disruptors, that are causing, estrogen-like or whatever. It's the stress. It's our poor diet. And so I bet if you could find a community that still adhered to the sleeping and resting. I mean, just think about like what in Spain, they take a nap still, right? A siesta, a 2-hour lunch. Everybody gets however many weeks of vacation. And when they're on holiday, they're not checking their emails. They are on holiday, right?
Yeah.
So it's us, it's the United States that's different than a lot of the other countries.
It's amazing. And so I'm sure you have a window into this situation since you are practicing physician and you see all of this, how stress is affecting fertility in the 20 to 40 age range, premenopause, menopause. Do you see any consistent insights into all that?
Absolutely. We're seeing more and more people with premature ovarian insufficiency, it's called primary ovarian insufficiency now, which used to be called premature ovarian failure. and we are seeing more infertility, and the standard infertility workup doesn't assess the stress hormones. Stress ovulation, it doesn't assess toxins. Are the tubes open? Do the sperm work? Are you ovulating? There might be some holistic fertility centers around that I don't know about. I'm just going by what our local centers do. And there are more integrative and functional providers with this approach, a more holistic, that are addressing environmental triggers, diet, stress triggers. So there is that movement coming. And now that is the benefit of social media, right? Creating awareness through the internet and social media. So people have access to this information where, when I went to medical school, there was no internet.
Right.
So I think that that there is a plus to
yes, of course.
Yes.
Of course. So let's look at the causality again, how stress affects hormones, and then hormones affect other endocrine issues like insulin, glucose, thyroid. The progression, because I think a lot of people just go, oh, my thyroid is acting up, and they don't do the causal links, which is so important, or sleep, just the sleep disruptions that so many people are experiencing.
Right. So if we look at actually the physiological response of stress, and let's just say high cortisol on the rest of the endocrine system, when you're running from a bear, you don't need to ovulate. So it's very common for women to skip periods during stress, right? Or not ovulate. It's going to prevent the release of any of the hormones from the pituitary gland. So that's FSH, LH, TSH. So your thyroid hormone, also TSH, is the release of TSH is decreased when cortisol is high from the pituitary gland. So if you don't have the thyroid TSH telling your thyroid to make T4, obviously. And it's such a subtle abnormality that unless you're really trained to detect it, traditional clinicians are still just looking at TSH and not realizing that there's a problem. So thyroid is going to be subclinical when you are in stress, either starvation, lots of stress, caloric restriction. The normal segue of the thyroid is to favor the production of reverse T3. And that's to make sure if you're so stressed and you're running from the bear, what you don't need to do is rev up your metabolism. You need to save those calories so you can run. So reverse T3 goes up in pregnancy and stress in low caloric states. So extended states, you're going to have that shift with thyroid. You're not going to get the conversion of T4 to T3. So again, unless you're trained to look at the nuances of the thyroid, we're missing a lot of subclinical hypothyroidism. Women who aren't ovulating, maybe they're skipping periods, maybe they're not skipping periods. The other effect of cortisol on the female hormones is that it slows down your detoxification of estrogen. So then you have the opposite. You have too much estrogen, not enough progesterone, estrogen dominance, and you have like heavier periods because your body doesn't clear estrogen. It's like charging on your credit card, but not paying it off completely. It may not be a problem at first, but over time, you have that finance charge that's going to go up and up and up. And even if 10 years from now, you cut up that credit card and never use it, you're still going to be paying on that balance for a long time. So we see a lot of women with issues with that. It also suppresses, again, if it's suppressing LH and FSH, you're not going to make testosterone in the testes as a male as well. And we're seeing a lot of men, we joke that it's called menopause, right? You wouldn't see that till the 60s, but now I'm seeing men in their 30s and 40s with low testosterone. Why? We're seeing more men in their 30s who haven't even had children yet who are having low testosterone. That was almost unheard of even 5 or 10 years ago. So many more men with low testosterone. Now, partly it's still not maybe standard of care to check that. So there may be even more men walking around that have low testosterone that don't know. So there's a huge effect as far as the physiological function of the menstrual cycle, the male, the thyroid with stress. And then you mentioned a little bit further with the effect on insulin and glucose. Well, if you think about when you're running from the bear, what do you need? You need glucose to be high to fuel your muscles to run. So cortisol wants blood glucose to go up. Then insulin comes around and insulin says, we need glucose to go down. Then guess what? Glucose goes down and glucagon comes around because it doesn't know, is this a problem? Let's get glucose back up. And then it's a yo-yo. And then cortisol and insulin are fighting to get blood sugar up and down. So you get insulin resistance because you keep trying to store these higher, it doesn't work as well. It's not as sensitive. The receptors are different. So then what do you think people eat when they're stressed? Convenience foods, which are really high in carbohydrates, right? The standard American diet is cereal for breakfast, sandwich for lunch, and meat and potatoes for dinner, right? So if you talk to people and ask them what they eat as far as vegetables, a busy person eating fast food and prepared food isn't getting very many vegetables. I think, again, there's still the movement of trying to be healthier too. So we've shifted a little bit, but I think it's a big problem in the effect of cortisol on the rest of these things.
Yeah. And this is very helpful. I think we need to educate people on, like I said, the causal chain, which is what we're talking about today. And, I know so many people say, I do everything right. I exercise, I eat right, I meditate, and I still have disruptive sleep. What would you say about that, the sleep issues people are experiencing?
Well, there could be a lot that is affecting sleep. And certainly in a female, progesterone helps you initiate sleep while estrogen helps you prolong, maintain sleep. So there's those cortisol, if it's disrupted, if it's high when it's supposed to be low and vice versa, it can affect how you sleep. Blood glucose levels, if you're doing that yo-yo we talked about and your insulin resistance, you're going to have a low sugar in the middle of the night, usually 4 a.m. And then you're going to wake up because you're having highs and lows in blood sugar. So there's a lot of things. Then we're talking about the blue lights and everything. So there's a lot of things that can disrupt your sleep as far as environmental triggers, cortisol, and all of that.
Yeah. So now that we've talked about all these causal chain and problems that you see, and for this podcast, we know that people need to improve their diet, and there's so many things you recommend in terms of the physical health. But let's talk about the emotions for a minute. What have you noticed in how attitudes of the heart affect the outcomes, like people developing more self-compassion or kindness or self-care in different ways? What does the heart mean to you in terms of your work?
Well, I would have to say that's where the younger generation is better than us, better than my generation, is they are pro self-care. They are very vocal about their mental health struggles, about their attitudes. Mindset is very vogue now. So all of these mind-body techniques are a little bit more mainstream, whereas somebody my age might have thought they're kind of woo-woo. So I think that's a positive about today's day and age. So it's interesting because through my own personal experience, we had an accident in my family, and I started kind of digging into the research of how much mindset affects recovery. There is some published data, and one of the underlying themes is the hope, right?
Yes.
So the people that believe they're going to get better, the people that want to get better and maybe don't accept their diagnosis, because how do we know, day one, you have 3 months to live, 6 months to live, or you're never going to walk again, or whatever the diagnosis is that you're handed. Okay. So if you follow those people out, there's a couple things. One is the people that have hope. So I'm trying to remember the quote that it's like, hope, there's a difference between, I can't remember. I think hope is the belief that everything's going to be okay despite the outcome. And I'm sorry, I should have.
That's all right. We got the feeling of what you're trying to say. Yeah.
Right. And there is data. And so there are people, the Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton, which spends all these people with data on mindset. And so I see in my practice, you do have to frame, positivity, heart-centered thinking about like how you flip the switch. I tend to be somebody who is a little bit half empty, glass is half empty, right? Something happens. I mean, it has to do with, kind of my upbringing, everything was my fault or whatever. And so I'm instantly, what did I do wrong? Instead of thinking like, okay, it's not me. This is a good experience. This happened because XYZ, and I'm really thankful. So you have to be so intentional. And that's what I love about the quick coherence, the heart focused techniques, the heart math. It's also like you are going back to a feeling when you were happy, when you're guiding someone through that, right? So think about Michael Phelps. He swam all of his races in his mind, right?
Yeah.
He already did it. He already won them. Beyonce already saw all of her best performances in her mind. And then there was one study, and I think it was a Joe Dispenza book that I read, that there were two pianists. One of them practiced, the other one just thought about practicing the piece, wasn't allowed to move his fingers, but just was thinking about it in his mind. And they both equally were able to perform this piece because of their mind. So I think that data is out there. And I think that's part of what heart math does is, whatever buzzword you want to use, heart tech center techniques, manifesting, your feet, going through your life, feeling the feelings of the life you already want, right? Your body has already done it. So like Michael Phelps, so like, any of these people, they're doing it a lot with sports psychology too.
That's exactly right. It's the visualizing, but that creates the feeling and the hope and the uplift, which changes the inner pharmacy, changes the hormonal cortisol, DHEA balance, changes the whole cascade. And it's, like we used to have a motto at Heart Math that a change of heart changes everything.
I mean, I think in your book, Transforming Stress, that was what stands out so much, that you had patients increase their DHEA and decrease their cortisol with no supplements, just with doing heart math. That is amazing, And so, one of the things it took me a long time to realize is I was constantly trying to fix my cortisol, right? And it was take this supplement, okay, stop delivering babies, cut back your this, do this, adjust this. Well, I'd get through one stress and there'd be another stress right around the corner. So it wasn't until one patient came in and she was older and she had a lot of stress and her husband had Alzheimer's and he was deteriorating, that finally her cortisol looked normal. And I said, what did you do? And she said, I took a class on meditation. And so I was like, wow. And so I started doing that. I started doing the heart math, because you can't control your life. And so now, instead of telling people to reduce their stress, I tell them to work on how the stress affects them and whatever tool works for them, whether it's sitting with your cat, knitting, reading, heart math, whatever the tool is, we've got to find a tool for you that's going to protect you. And heart math is easy because you can do it anywhere. If they've got the transducer in the app, even better, they're getting the feedback. But some of the techniques, you don't need much to be able to do. You just need the practice and to have it on your radar to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And the feeling shift that happens so quickly, that's what people are blown away often. It's like they do have more charge, more control over how they feel than what they have thought. We are not just victims of our emotional or mental state. We really can connect with our heart, activate our heart rhythm coherence,